This is a story about a battle between two companies, a duel between Austrians and Germans.
A story of two completely different approaches, yet both aiming for the same end goal.
But really, it's about a banana measuring contest, a battle that both needed to win. It's a battle that everybody ended up losing. Back in the early 2000s, BMW really had something to prove.
Their off-road image was rapidly deteriorating. I mean, their flagship off-roader, the GS, won magazine awards
For the best street bike of the year. The problem wasn't the sales figures, it was their reputation. From a legendary Dakar-winning company, they were starting to settle down, to become soft.
And this was a problem because just across the border, their rivals, KTM, were really starting to make a name for themselves in the off-road sector.
Call it an inferiority complex, call it competitiveness, call it whatever you like. But this is what started the development of BMW's craziest off-road project to date.
To put it into perspective, this was a time when BMW came out with a Hayabusa competitor
In the form of their K1200S. They were rumored to launch a MotoGP program too.
Look, it was a time when the Bavarians were not afraid to take on a challenge.
And so, the development of their first HP model started. HP stood for high performance, and in reality, it was a way for BMW to showcase what their boxer engine could do without any other limitations.
To show the world the real potential of their low center of gravity platform.
But in order to do that, they had to completely change how they do things. And in order for that to happen, they took a look back to the 80s, when BMW's arguably most important motorcycle came out, the R80 GS. When it launched, it shocked the world by winning 4 Dakar rallies. It was a bike that allowed BMW to reinvent itself.
And so, in order to do that again, they had to resort to doing things in the most un-German way, in the same way that brought them glory just 20 years before.
You see, the entire R80 GS platform existed because of a skunkworks team that developed inside of BMW. They took risks, didn't follow the corporate structure, and created something iconic. And actually, it was roughly around that time when the first idea of an HP motorcycle started to float around.
For 20 years, BMW developed multiple crazy prototypes, but they were always considered too compromised for the Bavarian standards.
So all of them were scrapped, dumped deep in the back of a BMW warehouse. But in 2002, that cycle broke, and another skunkworks team developed inside of BMW. This was a small team of enthusiasts, passionate off-road riders. From the designer, engineers, everyone working on the HP2 project had to have a sincere interest in off-road racing to dedicate their private lives to motorsport. This team's motto became, "Only an enthusiastic professional can offer another enthusiastic professional what he really wants."
They were completely disconnected from the Germans' regular engineering processes. And actually, this freedom brought in a bunch of problems because at times, as a huge corporation, BMW didn't really know how to manage such a project, how to manage all this freedom.
And yet, they found a way. And 3 years after the original idea for the HP2 came out, BMW launched their new creation, the HP2 Enduro. What started as the ultimate incarnation of a GS ended up only sharing the engine and driveline with its adventure counterpart. Nothing was normal or borrowed. It was the most extreme version of a dirt bike that ever existed. And for BMW, it was their hope to regain their off-road accolades.
But without knowing, BMW was just about to embark in one of the most fascinating battles in motorcycling history. Because somewhere inside Austria, in a little city called Mattighofen, KTM was planning their comeback.
The timing is a bit curious because it's almost like the Austrians found out about the HP2 project, but that's all speculation if you ask me.
What isn't speculation is the approaches that these two companies took. And they could not have been any more different.
For KTM, they decided to basically take their off-road proven 950 Adventure platform, chop it up, alter it slightly and put it to market. They took Giovanni Sala, famous Enduro and rally racer, and took his input to try and create the best big bore dirt machine to ever exist. I mean, if Meoni managed to create the original 950 Adventure, this was Giovanni's time. Take the chassis for example. KTM used a tubular steel frame, really similar to the one used by their ADV model, and slightly altered it to give it a different rake.
But really, it was mostly a 950 Adventure chassis. Meanwhile, BMW decided to reinvent itself.
They completely scrapped their GS frame and decided to learn from their past success in rally racing. So they went to HPN, the legendary company behind BMW's Dakar winning bikes from the 80s, and co-developed a brand new chassis just for this one project. And so HPN came out with a tubular steel frame, heavily inspired, if not copied, from their ex-Dakar prototype, the R900R.
It was the literal opposite of what the GS base was, but this allowed them to have a much stiffer construction while removing a lot of the weight from the original adventure bike.
And then it was the engine. The point for the Bavarians was to show how good their boxer idea could be. But they didn't just take the GS engine. No, that would have been too easy. They tuned the original power plant to deliver 105 horsepower and 85 foot-pounds of torque, almost 15 more than a regular GS.
They hacked the internals in order to get rid of the balancer shaft. Sure, that did make it vibrate, but it removed weight and increased performance, which was the ultimate goal of the HP2.
On the other side of the fence, in Austria, KTM went backwards? Yeah, at that time, KTM had already come out with their modern, fuel-injected 990 Adventure. But for some reason, even though this bike existed already, for the Super Enduro they decided to use the older, carbureted power plant from the 950 Adventure. I mean, it still developed 98 horsepower, which, while 7 less than the HP2,
it's still more than respectable. Thing is, KTM were aware that their early fuel injection system had some problems, classic early FI snatchiness and power delivery gremlins.
And since the Super Enduro was meant to be the ultimate off-road machine, power delivery was crucial. I have to say, love them or hate them, you have to appreciate how self-aware KTM was back then.
To be able to go back to something older when you realize that the newer version of the engine just wasn't as good.
Then you have suspension, which further shows how different these two companies tackled the challenge. For KTM it was business as usual, just put some standard, fully adjustable WP units front and rear and call it a day.
But for BMW, yet again they scrapped everything from the GS and started with a blank slate.
First order of things, the front telelever setup had to go in favor of some classic, fully adjustable WP units. Which is funny because at that time, KTM already had deep involvement with WP. Crucially, what this allowed was for the German engineers to create a simpler, yet sturdier and lighter front end. And then for the rear, they went even further.
They went to Continental Automotive Systems and started designing a rear shock unlike any other.
This unit used no spring or oil, it simply used air and some valves, both for the compression and rebound. This allowed them to shed quite a bit of weight over a conventional setup, while also, at least in theory, behaving better at higher temperatures. This also allows the rider to easily adjust the rear suspension for an onboard manual air pump.
Now, in theory all this sounds great, innovative. How well the system actually worked is a bit debatable.
I mean, they also used the system on the later G650X and that didn't get outstanding reviews. Also, on the factory HP2 bikes, they actually ditched the system for another conventional shock and spring unit. Apparently, while the air shock absorbed smaller bumps incredibly well, it just wasn't up to the task of hard racing.
But anyway, you can't deny how much future thinking had to go into this setup. And they didn't stop here, because BMW was also looking to create a machine that looked like nothing else.
So they used Mr. Edgar Heinrich's services. The same designer behind the S1000RR or the original R1200 GS. And love it or hate it, the HP2 actually won a design award at the 2005 Mondial du Enduro ceremony, while competing against the then new Yamaha R6 or Triumph Daytona 675.
In the orange camp, it seems like the design process was a bit more straightforward. Well, I can't know how it happened. I would assume someone just came in the design room, slapped a picture of one of their EXC Enduro models on a desk and told the team to copy that.
I mean, it does look close to KTM's Enduro models of that time. As you can see, the approaches these two manufacturers took couldn't be any more different. And it makes sense, simply because of the base that each had to start with. KTM had a more robust, off-road ready baseline, while BMW didn't. And so, in a way, these two radical approaches were needed. And it would be safe to expect that these would generate two completely different machines.
Surprisingly, the HP2 and the 950 Super Enduro came out with more in common than anyone could ever predict.
Take the weight. The BMW came in at just 175 kilos in dry form, while the 950 came in at 185 kilos. Fully fueled and ready to go, the Beamer weighed in around 196.5 kilos, while the KTM came in at 190?
Okay, that's a bit of a lie. KTM said that the Super Enduro would weigh just that in a ready-to-race state, which if you look at the numbers means that 1 liter of fuel should be more than enough for a race. Yeah, good old marketing.
But speaking of fuel, one common aspect they shared was their abysmal fuel capacities and ranges, both featuring a pathetic 13-liter fuel tank.
Some publications say the 950 actually had 14.5, yet most say 13. Look, I don't know, and it doesn't really matter, because in a nutshell, both these bikes had the range of a trials bike.
And then the ergonomics. With how different the frames and suspension setups were, both bikes had a seat height of 920mm. Just 7 horsepower separated the two power plants. They both decided to ditch any unnecessary systems like ABS, traction control, ride-by-wire, heated grips. Even for BMW, the biggest comfort features were...
Look at this thing, to level the bike. Simple and easy solution.
a spirit level based ride checker and a detachable license plate holder.
If you were to simply look at the spec sheets, you would never realize how different the paths these machines had to take in order to become reality.
But at the end of the day, only one could be crowned the winner. And so, in 2006, KTM decided to launch their response to the HP2 on their home territory, at the Erzberg Rodeo.
It's for sure the fastest bike in the whole race. Like your first time on a roller coaster, and then you realize there's more.
Hello, my name is David Knight.
Ciao, I'm Giovanni Sala. I come from Italy.
My name is Simo Kersi. I'm coming from Finland.
For the Austrians, it was crucial to win on their home soil, to show the world that they were still the benchmark in the high-performance off-road segment. And according to them, to Red Bull and to some publications, they managed to win the Erzberg Rodeo.
The speed is incredible.
But the thing is, in their own video, BMW also claimed to win the Erzberg Rodeo.
And in the official results archive, BMW is listed as the winner.
How exactly could both of them win? Or did they lie? Well, the truth is a bit more complicated, and there is a reason why both companies were a bit vague about it. But first, you have to quickly understand how the Erzberg Rodeo race was structured back then. Erzberg is a bit like a festival of races. For this festival, you actually had 2 tracks that hosted a total of 3 races. First, you have what we'll call the prologue track, which is a fast, classic enduro style race course. Then you have the hare scramble track, which is the one with all the huge boulders and extreme obstacles that only a handful of people finish every year. Now, this festival hosted 3 races: the 2-cylinder premier race on Thursday, the prologue race on Friday, and the main hare scramble race. Where BMW and KTM were really battling was in the first 2 races, because both of these took place on the prologue track, which was the fast one, the tracks that suited their monster machines best. Here is where the confusion gets cleared up. On Thursday, in the premier 2-cylinder race, David Knight won by 2 seconds on the KTM ahead of the BMW of Simo Kersi with a time of 8 minutes and 52 seconds. Now, on Friday, in the prologue race, which, as I remind you, happens on the same track, Simo Kirsi on the BMW managed to get the win ahead of Cyril Depre on the KTM with a time of 8 minutes and 56 seconds. So, yes, in reality, both KTM and BMW won. Just two different races that took part of the same festival. Now, if you were to split hairs, you could say that ultimately the 950 Super Enduro got the ultimate win, since out of all runs on the prologue track from both races, it posted the fastest time while being tamed by David Knight. And tamed is a good way to put it, because the Brit jumped on a stock borrowed 950 with no previous practice and posted that time. Now, the Madman did end up winning the main hair scramble race too, but on a much lighter KTM 300 two-strokes. Also, the two giants had entered the main hair scramble race too, so we could compare their results there, and again I would say KTM won, because Giovanni Sala managed to take his Super Enduro all the way to checkpoint 9, while Simo Kirsi on the HP2 only managed checkpoint 3 in the same allotted time. Look, the hair scramble is a completely different type of race, with different riders having different strengths. But ultimately, I would argue that in 2006, KTM managed to win the battle. Yet the war was not over. If you want to see more of the old school Erzberg races, check out the movie linked in the description below. BMW later went on to race multiple championships, from cross-country to Bajas.
After 23 laps, Simo Kirsi crossed the finishing line 1 lap ahead of Sala by a hair's breadth.
The Bavarians managed to win the German cross-country stage in Goldbach. In 2005, they also scored third-place finishes in their classes at the Tecate Baja 1000. In 2006, Simo Kirsi got 7th overall in the GCC series on board the HP2. The two companies kept trading blows, one after the other, to show who was the king of off-roading.
When looking back, you could argue that KTM won the war. But at the same time, you could just as well create an argument that BMW won. And they both would be equally as valid. And yet, if you ask me, I would say that in reality, none of them won. What had really happened was they both lost.
You see, while racing prowess can leave its mark on history books, you have to remember that these two are motorcycling companies. Their end goal is to sell bikes, and both the HP2 and the 950 Super Enduro were true commercial disasters. For the Germans, while technically they said the HP2 would be limited edition, they also said they'd build as many as the market demanded, and after the first lot, they had to stop.
In total, 2,910 HP2 Enduros were ever built. And on the Austrian side, while we don't know exact numbers, it's estimated that roughly 3,000 were ever built.
Think about it, BMW had such a hard time selling the HP2 that they started offering supermoto wheels as part of the purchase package. They even threw in off-road trainings for free, anything they could just to get rid of the damn things. In reality, nobody was buying any of these two monsters. Nobody really cared.
And one of the main reasons was a tragic pricing paradox. At launch, the HP2 demanded a sky-high $20,000, way more money even than a GS at that time.
For reference, in today's money, that's way over 30k for a glorified dirt bike. The joke became that HP didn't stand for high performance, but for high price. And sure, the orange pumpkin costed less, but it was still way too much. And so nobody bought them.
The thing is, here is where this paradox comes into play. Because nobody bought them, there are not many out there. So these days, these two bikes still demand incredible premiums even on the second-hand market.
In Europe, a Super Enduro starts between 7 and 9k, while the HP2 starts around 17k. They were expensive when new, nobody wanted them, which in the end made everyone want them later, which made them expensive again. Oh, the irony.
Look, we can sit here and blame the pricing all day long, but it wasn't the only factor in play for the total failure of these two competitors.
In reality, back in 2005, their target market simply didn't exist. These two bikes perfectly filled a niche that nobody was interested in.
Back then, doing extreme stuff on big bikes wasn't nearly as popular as it is today.
In their review, Motorcycle News said that it's hard objectively to see the point of the BMW HP2. I mean, as a hardcore racer, it still had a big inherent boxer limitation. And that is, you couldn't stick your foot out in a corner because, well, there were two giant lumps called cylinders in the way. And then you couldn't really do any adventure on them because you'd run out of fuel at the end of your driveway.
But if more extreme tracks were your thing, these were still 200 kilo sky-high monsters, far from ideal for the regular dirt enthusiast.
And so, just 3 years later, in 2008, even before the financial crisis came around, both the HP2 and 950 Super Enduro were killed. At the end of the day, both BMW and KTM managed to create two completely useless bikes, machines that proved to be utter commercial disasters.
And come on, the idea of a hardcore 100 horsepower 200 kilo dirt bike is kinda stupid on the face of it. And yet, I would argue that from this war, a winner did end up emerging. And that was us, the people.
You can bash the 950 and HP2 all you want, and rightfully so. They are flawed, uncompromised, and that's exactly what makes them brilliant. They're mad science projects, and that makes them extremely cool. These bikes were a statement of what motorcycling should feel like. They were a cucumber measuring contest between two companies, without any regard of cost, accounting, nothing.
That's why they're so brilliant. And because of this, tight enthusiast communities formed around these two bikes.
In the case of the Super Enduro, people started converting the damn things into adventure bikes, snow bikes, rally bikes, sidecars, ice racers, flat trackers, hill climbers, even two-wheel drive conversions. And on the BMW side, the HP2 became a legend within the Bavarian off-road circles, admired and adored by many.
That's why, in my opinion, we won simply because these two bikes were allowed to exist. Because it's this type of war that will stay in the two-wheeled history books.
In 100 years from now, nobody will care that the Tenere outsold the Touareg or which special edition GS sold best. But what will be remembered is a battle between BMW and KTM. A battle to take the off-road crown.
A time where engineers were let loose, when companies took real risks to try and create something out of this world. It's just a better story. And let's be fair, who doesn't enjoy a good story after all?